I am logged in with my instructor view right now. I am going to close my course menu over here just to get a little more screen real estate. So just so you're wondering, like, why does it look like that? It looks weird. This is just on the assignments page with my menu collapsed. If you didn't know you could do that, that's this little hamburger button right up here. You can give yourself some more screen real estate if you're on a laptop. Kind of handy. All right, so I want to start by just going over standard assignment settings to make sure everyone is aware of all the things you can do with just a standard assignment. Then we'll look at how you make manual gradebook columns and columns for extra credit. We will look at the student annotation assignment type, which is relatively new in Canvas. I want to touch on drive assignments. They're similar to student annotation, but they have a little more options if you are someone who likes to use either Google Drive or Microsoft OneDrive. Then we'll look at peer review assignments, and then last we'll take a peek at Unicheck, which is the plagiarism tool that's built into Canvas. So I'm just going to start by making a new assignment, and we will take a peek at the standard assignment settings. Obviously, of course, you have to have a title, and then in the assignment body, this is where you would put your instructions. Assignments can actually be really robust. You can embed YouTube videos in them, you can put file links, you can record yourself with the media recorder, so you can make the assignment itself very media rich. And then you've got your points to assign to your assignments. You can put it into a different group. So if it's not just a standard assignment, like maybe you have several kinds of assignments like weekly journal entries, or I don't know, you have 4 papers in the semester that are worth the same amount of points or whatever, you can make different groups for these. If you don't already have those groups built, you can just go create a group. Maybe this is weekly journals, and then they will get added to that group on the assignments page. You can change how the grade is displayed to students. So you've got percentage, maybe it's just a complete, incomplete, points in the letter grade, or it can be not graded. And then you can also do not count this assignment toward the final grade. So it will not put the points in the total. There are a couple of different submission types. So you have no submission, online submission, on paper, and external tool. Now, for all intents and purposes, no submission and on paper are the same thing. I think back in the day, Canvas made the distinction with the idea that a no submission would be, okay, you're not actually turning anything in for this. So you would select no submission for attendance or other things where they weren't actually turning something in. And then on paper, maybe gave the students a clue that if it was a hybrid class, you were going to physically bring in a paper to the class. I don't know. To me, it seems a little out of date. And whenever you need a manual column, we just use no submission. Online is what you want for most of your assignments because students are going to be submitting something in Canvas. And then we will look at external tool in a little bit when we talk about the drive assignments. So this is an online assignment. And then you have some options for how students can submit work. So you've got text entry, which means they can type directly in Canvas using the rich content editor. They could draft a 10-page paper right in Canvas if they wanted to. I don't recommend that, of course. If their computer crashes or something, it doesn't really save. You also cannot use the grading annotation tools when it is a text entry assignment. So all your little markup and highlighting, you do not have that because that requires a document file to load in the document viewer. So just be aware that that is a thing if you pick text entry. Website URL just provides them a space to copy and paste a URL. Loading and they are using an external website and then they have to drop that into an assignment. Media recordings lets the student fire up a webcam and record directly in Canvas, getting on the camera and saying, this is me, blah, blah, blah. Student annotation, we're going to look at as a separate deal. And then file uploads is typically what you want. That's so students can submit Word documents, PDFs, Excel, whatever. You can restrict the file upload type, but exercise caution when doing this because you have to be very specific in the kinds of files you will accept. So if you put doc, that does not include docx. You have to put both of those if you're going to accept both formats. If you're going to accept PDF, if you're going to accept RTF, TXT, and so on. I generally discourage people from doing the restricting thing just because inevitably it causes issues. However, if you're a stickler for read the instructions and you've told your students do not submit like pages files, Windows users can't open pages files. That's a Mac file format. you could come in here and say, okay, I'm excluding Pages files because I can't open them. It doesn't happen that often, but every once in a while I get an instructor, can you open this for me? Email it back to me. I'm like, yes, I can. Here's where you can adjust the number of attempts. So by default, it's set to unlimited. And you can say limited and the number of attempts. Plagiarism review, we're going to look at in a separate assignment as well. So we'll skip over that. You can also assign assignments as group assignments. If you are assigning group assignments, you have to make your groups first. Then when you tell it it's a group assignment, you will have any groups in this class. You will be prompted to pick the group. So if you have project groups or whatever, you can assign it as a group assignment. What happens with group assignments is that the first person in the group to submit is the submitter for everyone in that group. So you want to make them aware of that so that they have a conversation beforehand and Joe Bob doesn't just willy-nilly go, all right, here's our assignment, everybody. And the rest of the group's like, whoa, no. And then you can also choose to assign grades to each student individually. By default, if you don't check that, it's the same grade for every student in the group. This gives you some more flexibility for assessing participation if you have students doing feedback about how much did Joe Bob really do. And you can give them each individual grades, but they still will have the same paper in the speed grader that shows up for everybody. If you make comments on that paper with the annotations, everyone in the group will be able to see those. So be aware of that as well. Like you wouldn't want to comment on an individual student. It's something that was, Joe Bob's losing 5 points for being late, where everyone could see that. Not going to do a group assignment. We're also going to talk about peer reviews separately. And then at the very bottom, you have your due dates and availability dates. You do not have to set an availability date. Some people think that you have to set one. If you don't, that just means the assignment is available right away all the time. If you do want to control when they can access and when they lose access, then you can come in here and set available from and until dates, and then your due date. This last little thing sometimes gets overlooked, but this is how you can assign a separate due date for individual students. So if you have to give an extension or somebody's out on maternity leave or they need access or need to do it earlier than the rest of the class, you can use this little add feature. So when you click this, it will say, okay, who are you assigning this to? So I would select a student, pick fake student here. And you can actually pick multiple students if they're going to have the same due date, but you can also have multiple different due dates for individual students. Just lather, rinse, repeat with the add student that needs a different due date. Then I can say that Samantha doesn't have to turn it in until 17th. Everybody else has a due date. You'll notice it changes to everyone else up here. Don't take that out of there. Otherwise, it's literally only assigned to Samantha and everyone else's grades will go bye-bye. They come right back when you fix it. So slight moment of panic, but yeah. So I can have everybody else is due on the 10th. And I've got two separate due dates for this assignment for whatever reason. And then I would save and publish. And it'll tell you right here. Got two separate due dates. Here I have that, now I have that weekly journal category. And then if I needed to move some existing assignments up there, I could just drag and drop them up here so that they are all in the appropriate category. All right, let's talk about how you make manual gradebook columns. Not intuitive at all. So if you've never done it before, you're like, what is the deal? But you actually have to make an assignment to create a gradebook column in Canvas. So I'm going to start by making another assignment. This is very common for extra credit, attendance. I'll just call this one extra credit. And it is helpful because the students will see this assignment to put some kind of description in here so they understand, oh, I'm not actually turning anything into this. This is just for extra credit. Because it has to be published in order for you to be able to put scores into it in the grade. So extra credit. Now, when we're talking about extra credit, you want your point value to be 0, because otherwise it will inflate your overall total, and the students who don't do the extra credit will then be penalized for not getting those points. So extra credit columns always get 0. Otherwise, you would just put your point total for the activity like you would a regular assignment. pick whatever assignment group it belongs to, your display options. And then this is the important part. Your submission type needs to go back to no submission because they're not going to turn anything in. You're just using this to put points in the gradebook. If you leave that to online, they're going to see a start assignment button when they click on this thing to read the details, and then they're going to go, I don't know, I didn't make anything. What do I do? So just make sure you leave that at no submission for making a gradebook column, right? And then of course, you do have to publish it. Sidebar, the order of your assignments on the assignment page is the order that your gradebook columns are in, from top to bottom, left to right. Now we're going to take a look at the student annotation assignment. This is relatively new. I want to say maybe last fall this became a thing. Student annotation assignment is kind of cool. It allows you to provide a document to the students. They all get their own copy, and then they have access to the annotation tools in Canvas to mark on top of it and make comments. So for example, if you were doing a foreign language class, you could provide them with 6 sentences and then ask them to highlight and identify errors. Or, you could put the masculine feminine version of the word and they would have to highlight which version of the word would you use in this instance. So it's pretty cool. It is limited to what they can do with the annotation tools, so they cannot edit the text of the document directly like you could with a Google Doc.
Could you put like a journal article and they'd have to highlight like a hypothesis?
Yep. You could. So
research articles.
Yes. APA corrections.
Yes. APA corrections. That was an example I was going to use, but then I went with the foreign language one. But yes, you can. So everybody gets the same document. Then they get access to the markup tools. There is a text tool that allows them to type on the document, but they're not editing the text directly. So
can they put a comment?
Yes, I will show you from the student perspective after I show you how to build one really quick. Again, you're going to want to explain to them in detail, what are they supposed to do with the document? There's where you put the instructions. All your standard assignments, points, whatever, all the same. It does have to be an online submission, and then you will have the student annotation option. Once you click that, you will be prompted to upload a file. So if you've got something already in your course, you could point to it, or you can upload a file. So I've got my fake annotation assignment here. Click on that, and it will show me what I have provided. And then if that's the wrong one, I can just hit the trash can. And then everything else is the same number of attempts. And if I save and publish this, I am going to jump over into the other browser where I'm logged in as a student now, and I'll show you what that looks like from the student perspective. Go into assignments, annotation assignment. I collapse the menu because this is kind of a screen real estate hog. It does not work in Firefox. Your students need to make sure they have Chrome, or it does work in the Edge browser, but we don't normally recommend that. I just have to be logged into 2 different browsers to be a student and a teacher at the same time. So here's the annotation document. Everyone gets the same one. And then I can use the point comment tool, and I can click and I can say, great title, or change the title. I can use the highlighting tool, and I can even pick different colors of highlighting. So you can have them highlight multiple different, where's my scroll bar?
Are these the same type of annotation tools we have available if
They are.
they do file upload?
Yep.
Okay. That has not been a setting that was on a lot of my things. I have a lot of text entry. And
Yeah.
the file.
Yes, text entry doesn't let you use these tools at all. So then they can come through here, and once you highlight something, you can also comment on it. So you can have them, like that foreign language example, highlight the incorrect word and then type the correct one. And this is cool because you can actually come in here and reply to their comments. There's a reply box. There's text where they can type on it, strike through, they can write, they can select an entire area, so on and so forth. But then when they are done doing their annotation, then they go submit. And whoo, good job, you turned it in.
We got that one.
Confetti. I know, isn't that fun?
That'd be good.
Right.
And then when you go to this assignment in the speed grader, then you see all of their annotations. And it actually labels the comments with their name. So because you can come in here and do additional commenting, and so then they know who is commenting what and where and so on. So that is the student annotation assignment. Drive assignments they're similar to student annotation, but they do have more flexibility because essentially what you're going to do is if you use Google Drive or Microsoft OneDrive, you create the starting document out on your drive, and then you're essentially going to pull that into Canvas, and each student is going to get a copy of that document to do their own work. The difference being they have more options for how they interact with that document. They can add text, pictures, hyperlinks, et cetera, et cetera. And then what happens, even though the copy of the file lives on the student's drive, regardless of which version, when they hit submit, Canvas takes a snapshot of the document as it is at the time of submission. So later, if Joe Bob goes back to that document and makes a bunch of changes, he can't come back and say, well, but that's what I did. Like you can see in my Google Doc that I made all these things, because Canvas will have that snapshot at the time of submission. And then they can't change that copy that got turned in. So these do require that the students authenticate in Canvas with their Google account or their OneDrive account. And so you may have to have the discussion with your students, like if they have privacy concerns about, I don't use cloud storage because I'm not comfortable with that or whatever. Just be aware that that is a thing. There's an authorization process. Student accounts, of course, are all LC Mail accounts, are all Google accounts. So if I was going to build this, I would use Google Drive just because it's a little more seamless in them logging in. They may or may not have set up their OneDrive account if they didn't go out and do that process, even though they can and get OneDrive and Microsoft for free. Not every student does that. So it's a little more seamless if you are using Google for the source document. But just be aware that that is a thing. It's a third-party integration piece. But it's pretty smooth. So how we set this up, new assignment. I'm going to call this one. This is actually really cool because, like I said, you could create a PowerPoint presentation. I guess it's not a PowerPoint presentation, it's a Google Slides. Use the right terms, where they could build a slideshow about, tell me 3 cool things about yourself. Or you could provide an Excel spreadsheet with some basic data, and they have to format the cells to do the calculations. Do Excel or Google Sheets. Yeah. So let's call this Google Sheets assignment. And you're going to want to tell them in the instructions what they're supposed to do with the Google Sheet, points, groups, grade, etc. And then here's where we're going to use that external tool thing we saw earlier. So we are going to link to an external tool. And when we click the Find button, you're going to get this list of all of the bajillion things. But you're just going to scroll through here and find Google Drive Cloud Assignment. Now, if you are a Microsoft OneDrive user and you want to use OneDrive, you'll find Office 365 Cloud Assignment. The process is exactly the same. It's just potato, tomato, whichever one you prefer. I'm going to go with the Drive assignment because that's where I built my example. So once I click on that, it is going to go out. Here's that authorization process. It's going to ask me to hang on. Seriously. Signed in before to make sure this is on. There we go. Should work with this one. Have to, assuming I know which of my 50 passwords this is.
Right.
I was smart. I brought my phone.
I don't do that enough.
Vacation. Wow.
I'll get an update for a game, but no, do I have it with me when I need to update it?
Unfortunately, my example is not on this Google account. My example was on my LC one, but that's okay. What this does is it goes out to my Google Drive and I can find a document. Let's just, I don't know, pick something. It doesn't really matter. Yeah, here's my job description. I'll put that in there. So I pick the file that I want to use for this assignment. Oh, there's a spreadsheet. Where's that? And I hit select. And it's going to say, are you sure? Is this really what you want? You can go back to the file picker if you click on the wrong thing. Otherwise, you're going to say submit. And it will take you back to this, make you click through it again. And now you're back to where you want to be. It doesn't look like it really did anything. You just have to know that, yes, it did. It's going to grab that file. It's ideal to have this checked, load in a new tab, because when the student starts the assignment, it's going to actually launch a browser window and take them to their Google Drive where they have access to the assignment. But it's a little bit modified because it has a submit button and everything. So it's all built in. It's got some instructions that tell them how the whole concept works. And I'll show you from the student view. But it's good to check that. But then all your other assignment settings are the same. Just save and publish. That needs to load in a new browser, blah, blah, blah. I'm not going to do it as the teacher because that's not as relevant. Then if I am over, now I'm in my student login again. Go to the assignments. Oh, I saved this one, the one I was setting up. So actually, this is what it looks like if you tell it to not load in a new window. And it's because it basically it pulls Google into Canvas.
Oh, I
It's
see.
very small and weird. So that's definitely check that box. The other one is made. Did I call it drive assignment as well? I did, didn't I? Oh no, I
Google
called it
Sheets.
this. There we go. So this, in theory, will load in a new window. And then they get this at the top. The embedded document is a document your teacher created. You'll be able to edit it in Canvas or in Google Docs. Once you've completed it, you will submit it by pushing the button on this page. So now I have my copy of the document, and I can use all of the standard. It doesn't like this because I'm in Microsoft Edge. I'm not in Chrome, so it's not showing me all the tools I have access to. I mean, I guess it's got some things over here, but kind of weird looking. But this, I can actually come in and edit the actual document. So I don't think it likes the fact that I used an account that was not my work one. Anyway. Trust me, it works. It just didn't like me logging in with the one I actually should have logged in with. But I could edit this text. I could go through and make comments and say, oh, you need to update, this position, responsibility, whatever. And then when I'm ready to turn it in, I hit submit. And then I'm done. I can go back to Canvas. Here I am in the speed grader now for Samantha's submission, and I would be able to snapshot version of what she turned in at the time and look at all of her comments and use the annotation tools to make any grading or a rubric if I attached one. Peer review now. Peer review is one of those things that can work beautifully if it's properly set up in a course. The biggest, I guess, the obstacle maybe with peer review has to just do, I think, with how long it can take. Because students need the time to write the paper and submit it, and then they need the time to actually do the peer review, right? And ideally, what you want with peer review is probably 2 separate assignments. You want a peer review assignment that you use to assign points for the students actually doing the peer review, and then you would want one where they're submitting their final paper or final version. The other tricky thing about peer review, again, is you have a soft deadline of you have to turn your paper in by this date, and then you have the actual deadline of you need to get your review done by this date. But Canvas doesn't allow you to put 2 due dates into an assignment. So what I would recommend if you are doing peer review is building a calendar item for that initial, your paper needs to be submitted by deadline, so that they have something that pops up in their to-do list, even if it's not an actual assignment, but they at least see it. And then the due date for the peer review assignment is that due date to be done with the peer review itself. So, we're just going to make a standard assignment. This is going to be peer review. Here's where you're going to put all of your instructions for what you expect out of the peer review. It's also very cool with a peer review assignment. If you attach a grading rubric, the students will be able to use that grading rubric during the peer review process if you don't choose the anonymous peer review. If you choose anonymous peer review, all they can do is comment. So I don't know I personally don't find that very helpful because it's very limited. Like, it's hard to refer to something in a paper without actually being able to click on the paper to indicate what you're talking about. So start out with your standard assignment setup, and it'd be an online assignment. You want to use file uploads because they can't use the annotation tools if it's text entry. Number of attempts can be whatever. Wouldn't probably want plagiarism review at this point because it's a draft. And then we're going to do the require peer reviews. You can assign the peer reviews manually or automatically. Even if you select manually, later on, you can actually have it auto assign them. So if you click this and you're like, oh, wait, I don't want to do this one by one, don't sweat it. You can also select automatically assign peer reviews. And you tell it how many peer reviews does each student have to do. And then you would select the date that you want it to automatically assign. So that's where you have that soft deadline. You know, if they have to have the paper turned in by first Wednesday, then you would maybe say, okay, Thursday at 8 a.m., that's when I want you to then assign the peer reviews to make sure everybody gets their paper turned in. Because before they can review someone else, they have to turn in their own paper. After the fact, you can always go into the peer review settings and assign a peer reviewer, even if you've auto-assigned, and we'll look at the peer review assigning interface here in a second. I'm going to just leave it to manual. And then this is, you can have them appear anonymously, but you have severely limited tool set at that point. Assign them to everyone, all your due dates. Again, this would be the due date that the peer review would need to be completed by. And then your points, again, are going to be the points you're assigning for students having done the peer review, not for the actual paper. We'll save and publish that. And then once you have it set up, you'll see that there's a peer reviews area in the assignment settings. So here is where I can go in and I can see so far none of them have been assigned because I set it at manual. So if I do want to determine specifically which student gets which other student, I would start with Benny, give Benny another submission, and then it gives me a drop down and I can pick, okay, he's gonna do Herbie, Butch T. Cougar is gonna do Benny, whatever. That's kind of tedious. So you can also automatically assign the reviews at any point. The reason it's grayed out is because no one has actually turned their papers in yet. I can't auto assign them until they've submitted their work. I can manually assign ahead of time. And then later on, when you come back here, you can check the progress of whether students have done their peer reviews yet. Right now, it's got an exclamation mark because Benny hasn't completed his review of Herbie's paper. And then this little bell is kind of nice. Click that, it'll kick a notification to the student that says, yo, this is due tomorrow and you haven't done it yet. It just sends out a little reminder that says, you've been assigned as a peer reviewer to Herbie Husker. This one, students have actually submitted some papers, fake students. But if I click on the review, I would then be able to see Samantha's work. Now, I'll actually go to it so I can show you the full-on interface for the student side. Here's my peer review. I click on this. If I haven't turned in my paper, I won't see anything over here. But now I can see I've submitted my own paper I uploaded, and then I can see that I have been assigned to review student 3. So when I click on student 3, then I get the sort of the peer review interface. Now, I have a video that shows how to do this from the student perspective. It's something I teach in my class that I teach, my SD 133 class. So if this is something that you do and you want that video, I'm happy to share it out because it's not super intuitive necessarily. There's a lot of clicking on this page for the student to get to everything that they have available to them as a peer reviewer. So for example, it's not necessarily intuitive. You have to click view feedback in order for the document loader to load and see the paper. It's also a real huge, I'm zoomed in. It's a bit of a screen hog though. So zoom out here. But they have to click that view feedback thing in order to access the paper and see the markup tools. They also have to come up here and click show rubric in order to see the rubric that you have attached. Once they click that, then they have access to the full range of the rubric. They have that commenting button so they can add comments to their rating. There's the grammar and spelling. So, and then they've got just the standard add a comment area as well. But this is only available in its full extravagance as a non-anonymous peer review. With anonymous peer review, all you get is the add comment box on the right here. I'm going to go ahead and save this. I'm now back in instructor view, go to peer reviews, and I can see that Samantha has conducted her peer review of student 3. And then if I click on student 3, I can open up the rubric and see what she commented on. I can load I can load the view feedback and see any annotations she made. And then the instructor puts in the final grade. So even though the rubric has points attached to it, those points do not transfer to the grading area. You are the final call on what the grade is for this. And this would be you grading their completion of the peer review itself.
So does the student then have to go into the assignment to see their peer reviews from other people?
Yes.
They go back into the assignment
So
where they do the peer reviews?
So if I log out as the student, and I'm going to log in as student 3 real quick and see, oh, look at this, I've got recent feedback. Peer review. And then I can open this up, show rubric, and then I would see any comments. So, yeah. If there are no questions on that, we will just wrap it up with good old Unicheck. Unicheck is just the built-in plagiarism checking tool. So if you are using it to check final submissions for papers, you can have them uploaded to a global database so they become a permanent part of the database that other papers are checked against. If it's a draft assignment, typically you would not check that, and you want to use that feedback that the tool provides as a teaching tool and not necessarily a punitive tool. So for draft papers, make a new assignment. Draft paper. Standard setup, instructions, points, all that good stuff. The file upload, it does have to be a file upload. It will not check a text entry because it takes the document. But I don't think it's limited by the file types. And then here, under plagiarism review, is where you're going to select Unicheck. And you'll get a couple of options. So this top one is the important one for when it's a draft. You want to make sure you uncheck this. You do not want a draft going into the global database, because then when they submit the final version, it's going to ding. It's going to ding their own paper. Like, hey, we just, this looks awfully familiar. Excluding quotes and references is good to keep on. You know, full disclosure, I'm not entirely sure what this bottom one does. Then you can determine when the students can see the report. That makes more sense to me if it's a teaching tool to let them see it right away. It's going to be a peer review. So once we have that set up, it is in place, and students, when they go to submit, they have this little checkbox that basically they're signing off that the work they are submitting is their own original work. Standard assignment, I start the assignment, upload my file, and then it will not let me submit until I check this little box right here. Once that's done processing, the student will see a little report over here that gives them a percentage, and they can click on that and get the full report of what was marked, what source it was pulled from, so on and so forth. And you also will have access to see that as well in the SpeedGrader. You go into the SpeedGrader for the assignment. Yeah, so fake student paper 1 was 87% copied. And when I click on that score, it will launch the Unicheck tool in a new browser, and it will highlight all the things, and it will tell you where they came from. Here you can look at quotes, exclusions, all. I mean, it's pretty detailed what it includes.
Angela, I have a question. So if a student submits a paper and then they're notified that it's a high percentage of unoriginal work, and they think, oh, well, I want to change that. I don't want to submit that. Can they use that to improve their work and make another submission?
Yes, that's the idea, really. This is meant to be a teaching tool, not a I busted you for cheating tool necessarily. So again, that's why we would have that draft version where they can upload their draft, they can get that report, they can go to the writing center and review it with them and say, what do I need to do? You know, it's telling me that I've got all this copied content, and then they can get guidance on how to cite quotations properly. And okay, you didn't, you know, you have this great information from an online source, but you need to rephrase it so that you're not just using word for word what the article online said. And so yes, it is intended to be a teaching tool.
But to get that feedback, they have to submit their paper. It's not something that's I don't even know how to say this. I'm just thinking,
Get to see it before it comes in as something that we need to grade.
Right. Well, they can if you set up a draft submission. So you would make an assignment that was just a draft submission. You would untoggle that first option where it said add it to the database. So the student, I mean, you could even make this an ungraded assignment. It wouldn't have to count towards the final grade if you're literally just wanting them to use the tool to generate the report so that they can then see what they're doing wrong and then go get help either from you or from the writing lab or whatever. Final submission where you're like, okay, this is the real enchilada now. You're turning this in. You can turn on that add to the global database so that, you know, it becomes part of the permanent record out there. Because even if their final paper ideally will not be dinged with a whole bunch of copied work because hopefully they will have fixed it, you could set a draft to have multiple submissions and they will get a report for every submission so they can keep using it over and over until they've figured out how to not be a plagiarizer. And then when they submit the final one, it'll come back with a clean report, but then their paper is out there to be compared against for future terms, which is what you want because you don't want them going, okay, you know, hey, Joe Bob, I took this class last semester and this paper got an A. Here you go. You can also submit papers to Unicheck. There is a Unicheck tool in the sidebar that you can run a paper on your own on the fly. So you have to go into your course settings and into navigation, and you have to move it up into your visible course menu. So normally it's just hanging out down here. Bring it up into your menu and save that. And then you can go to Unicheck, click the add button, browse your computer to find the file, take student paper number 2, upload, but you would check this once you upload it and you would say check for similarity. It will run it and give you a report.
But they get theirs right away, or does theirs?
It still takes a little, it can. I mean, it's typically pretty quick,
Okay.
within a half hour to an hour most of the time, but it all boils down, because it is an external tool, it just boils down to how much usage the tool is getting at the time. All right, I believe that was the last type of assignment to talk about.